Hi, my name is Micah Furlong, and I will be presenting this presentation on America's Early Design Masters. There's a few different topics that we'll be covering before we get into the designers themselves, so let's just hop right into it. New York City history is a pinnacle point of these design masters era and when they came up. So I've been asked to examine the history of New York City from the 1950s and 1970s and how New York City became the advertising center of the world. Well, it started with post World War II. This boom of people coming back from the war fueled a demand for modern advertising and kind of needing a shift from what it was before, and to get away from the war era advertising that was being used at the time. Madison Avenue became one of the biggest hubs for advertising during this era. You had DDB, Ogilvy, and BBDO that were some of the largest agencies at the time. Many people deemed this the creative evolution with the style at the time and the kind of different aesthetic that it took on compared to war times. It was a lot more witty and interesting visually and a lot more idea driven ads versus politically driven ads. Redefining branding and typography was a big deal during this time. A lot of things that were done were creating new waves of eras that are still used today. NYC set the standard for modern advertising and marketing and pretty much all of the things that you see in day to day life. Modernism is the foundation for this era of advertising and graphic design. Modernism was first coined with different artistic styles like Bauhaus and the more bold colors, strong typefaces, and abstract concepts. So that can be seen in the images I have on screen. So Paul Rand and his logo for Next, which was of course for Steve Jobs. You have very bold typeface, very different than the wartime typography that was used. It's a lot more neutral in a way, but still very exciting visually as a typeface. And then the simple four colors, each one different for the letters, and then the square as well, or the cube, creates a lot more dynamic feel to the image, which was pretty much the core of a lot of modernism graphic design at the time. And then with Herb Luballin's typography, it had very somewhat chaotic looks. It was very different. This is one of his iconic posters of his typography, and it really does define his look. It's a little bit different in each one. Each letter is a little different, and at the time that was very important. We were getting away from all the necessities. We had a lot more commercial manufacturing. So instead of the old fashioned ways of printing typography and printing out anything with text, we were able to start transitioning to more large scale things and a lot more commercial things that could be international. So the masters themselves, we will get into. We'll explore the work of these masters and their time period they were in, and how their experimentation with different creative ideas brought a new discipline and a new look to graphic design. These artists include Paul Rand, Saul Bass, Herb Lupin, and Doyle Dane Bernack. These artists had their own specialties that all impacted graph, New York graphic design in very different ways. Sorry, my references just moved a little bit. Okay. So, looking at Paul Rand, a lot of his work was focused on defining modern corporate branding. So, a lot of simplicity, a lot of logic in his work. That was a big deal for him. While Saul Bass brought motion and emotion to his design with his logos and as well as his film. And Herbert Luabin, I'm saying that very wrong. His typography was very expressive and was used with visual storytelling. That was his niche for sure. And Doyle Dane Bernack, he humanized advertising and creativity. That was kind of his style. He really made things a lot more for the people versus, for corporations. So looking at Paul Rand first, how does their work impact me today? Well, a lot of his styles that are iconic, so that can be seen on this other slide. So these different looks, mixing up mouses here. So on this image here, we can see different brands and logos that he contributed to, and you can still see aspects of his work in new modern renditions of those logos. And with different artistic movements that he was a part of and designs and whatnot, it was very, very impactful. He, with a lot of my graphic design, I prefer bold colors. That is something I really enjoy, and kind of odd neutral shapes. That's something that I often incorporate into my work. So similar with the skeleton here, the kind of just bare bones of an image, you get the gist. Like, oh, this is a skeleton head. It doesn't have all the details of a skeleton head, but you know what it is. And that's a very important thing that's contributed to a lot of people's designs is the simplicity and the neutrality. And that's a lot of what his work brought on. Why was their work so effective in communicating their clients' needs? A lot of his work was just clear and functional and had clarity, and that was a huge thing that a lot of people wanted during this era. That was a very important thing in advertising at the time in New York. He brought a lot of European modernism as well, which was very Bauhaus, very, very Swiss. That was very in at the time, and it still is today. It is a timeless style. Do you think graphic design would be the same today without their contribution, and why? Absolutely not. I think his work is very foundational. I think all of these artists are very foundational, but especially Paul Rand. You still see aspects of his designs in today. I mean, the fact that he worked with Steve Jobs, who has a very, very specific look that he likes to go for, is very impressive. And especially for that time, that paved the way for modern art. And his influence paved the way for modern art. So, moving on to Saul Bass, same questions here. How does their work impact me today? Well, looking at their art, I still love this style. So the breaking apart of images and the kind of cut and paste, kind of paper mache look to his art is phenomenal. It is a very iconic look. It is very well known, and it is still used today. You see it in YouTube videos. You see it in independent film projects and coming out from art schools and coming into modern design and modern media. It is definitely never going away because people love the simplicity. People love the individuality that can come with the stick and paste of the cutout pieces that was really common with a lot of his work. Do you think graphic design would be the same today without their contribution? Absolutely not. His work is truly timeless, just like everybody else in this group, but you see a lot more of his work in media. And a lot of media is social media. You have visual media, with graphic design, but you have motion graphics on top of that. So a lot of motion graphics I have done have incorporated the Saul Bass style with that paper mache look and the cut and paste and the bold colors and silhouettes and intense typefaces. I mean, look at Anatomy of a Murder. that typeface is very chaotic. It's very intense. And it honestly, that kind of look reminds me of a primitive version of the intro from the movie Seven. So that kind of serial killer handwriting, like that's the kind of feel I get with the typeface that he used in the look of the overall poster for that movie. It's just goes to show that his work is still being used today. You can still find the essence of his style in modern things today. Uh, why was their work so effective in communicating their clients' needs? Um, a lot of his work involved revolutionizing title sequence design in film. So a lot of his stuff was changing the mold that had been created, and that's why people went to him. They knew that he had something different. He had a different kind of niche than what had been used before. Like you think of the movie Sound of Music, that title scene is credits and music, and that's it. There's kind of it's bland. It is just very beautiful typefaces used, very elegant, but there's not visual interest with them. It's here's some text and here's a video behind it. That was kind of the style at the time, and you see that with the majority of movies at the time. But with Saul Bass, a lot of his work completely checked that out the window, and that's what people were wanting. It was, post World War II. It was the modern era where we're jumping into new waves. Where there's advancements in technology. There's all sorts of exciting new things happening in the world. So we need exciting new titles. We need exciting new design. And that's what a lot of Saul Bass's work provided. Okay, we're going to be moving on to Herb Laulin. I'm going to keep getting that wrong. So, how does his work impact me today? So, looking at his work, his typefaces are iconic. They are some of my favorite ones to use when I'm designing and when I'm creating different looks for my graphic design and for my motion graphics. And I'm a photography major, and a lot of typefaces are important. You want a certain aesthetic to pair with a image. Like if you have a poem that pairs with an image, you want the correct typeface, and so you want it to mesh with the image. So if you have more of a vintage style, you want more of a vintage typeface, or you want something swirly and elegant and beautiful. So a lot of Herb, I'll just call him Herb. A lot of Herb's images. Sorry, my cat is freaking out. A lot of Herb's work is that has that elegance, but also has that boldness. So you see with the 72 here, for an example, that has that calligraphy look, but it has way more flair to that. There's a lot more excess. It's a lot, showier. It's broader. It's grander. And same with this cursive L here, that, and just overall this typeface, it's a lot more of that, what I would think of vintage New York style. That is exactly what I think of as that typeface. And when you're going for a certain look, you want that aesthetic. You want the exact style and the creativity that comes with that. Um, okay, so do I think graphic design would be the same today without their contributions? No, I don't. I think graphic design would be very lacking. There wouldn't be the boldness that, or typography. There wouldn't be that boldness without his work. He had so many different foundational looks that were so influential to the modern world. I mean, uh, he designed for and co-founded magazines like Avant Garde and Eros and Fact, and a lot of his work was visually experimental, and that was a very important thing. And those magazines still influence today. His work will forever be timeless because of his contributions to different aspects of New York style and New York magazines. And magazines led the world. That is for sure. At the time, magazines were it. And to be the co-founder of three magazines that were so influential to the world is, you can't beat that. There's no getting rid of that. He will forever be in so many different parts and aspects of design. Um, Why was their work so effective in communicating their clients' needs? So known for his logos and visual identities, they blended both word and image seamlessly. So that was a big, big thing with his work. Um, he knew how to combine things in a way that was so just perfectly blended, and that's what a lot of clients wanted at the time. That was a very important thing for New York style. It was finding that perfect happy medium and finding exactly where they fit. And Herb knew how to get that. He knew how to recognize the needs of a client and create it perfectly and reflect it well, or reflect it in a way that was perfect for his style. And that's why people went to him. All the great artists, people go to them for that style. It's, they know what they're getting and they're paying for that on purpose. So, okay, we're going to move to Doyle Dane Bernack. How does Bernac's work impact me today? So a lot of his work, he did a lot of advertising. You can see a lot of his work for VW Bug and different home magazines and different just general magazines. A lot of his stuff used negative space. So you can look right, you see that right now in this ad right here. You see a question down below. I can't quite see it with how small it is on my screen, but and then you have off in the distance, you see the VW Bug. And a lot of that advertising for VW was similar things. It was big open space and then the bug, or leading just to the bug. Like having in this image, having that VW just slightly off in the corner, and then you have the text at the bottom. That is very visually interesting because it's like, oh, I know exactly where I need to look at. That is exactly what that does. He utilized negative space in such a phenomenal way that made sense. And you have the simplicity of just here's an image, here's the overall look, here's a word. That is truly beautiful advertising right there. That is great graphic design, great composition. That is a very, very well thought out look. And you have with different images with the home magazines and whatnot. With this image right here, you have the eyes and then you have your question. So your eyes are never bigger than your purse. So, and then you have this woman here and her eyes are cut off from up here. So you see the broader eyes. It's kind of as if her eyebrows are raised just by her eyes being bigger in this composition. So you kind of feel that like, oh my goodness, what is this? Because of the way that composition feels. It's really not the 1, 2, 3 step. It's the 1, 2. Here we go. Like this is the look of this magazine. Like here's this woman who physically, her physical attributes, her characteristics look like she's surprised. And then you have the surprise in the eyes of the second part of that image. And I think that really shows the clarity of his work. And you can still use these sorts of designs. A lot of work that I do, I prefer simplicity. A lot of my photography, I prefer simplicity. So when I started including that graphic design element and that motion graphics element, when I'll create different looks and whatnot, I like using very minimalistic looks and just simple because I know they create that impact. And seeing Bernac's work, that's where I see that impact. That's where I see that example of that style being used that works so well and is successful. Um, why is their work so effective in communicating their clients' needs? I mean, look at VW. That was perfect. His whole ad campaign for VW was absolutely iconic and is still a look that I remember seeing in magazines of VW that my dad kept in the house. That was still a look that was used in modern advertising for VW. It just spoke to the essence of that company in general, and that was a lot of what Bernack did. He spoke to the needs of a company and redefine them if need be, but his style was so iconic, it was really so easy for him to come into on a project and create something new that was perfect for his clients. Do you think graphic design would be the same today without their contribution? Absolutely not. absolutely not. I think a lot of his work made big waves for modern advertising for sure. I still see it today. You can still see it in so many different work, especially car advertising. As someone who comes from a car family and a very big mechanic family, that is a huge look that you see in a lot of car advertising. You see it on Instagram today, the different way that they structure shots and such to show off a car at a car meet. That is a very iconic thing that is still seen today. That is exactly from his advertising. That is exactly the style that he is known for. Um, gosh. Um, uh, and in conclusion, looking at everybody's work, it is very clear to see how the American modernist movement would not have been the same without them. They, in each individual way, contributed different things that were vital to the graphic design movement in the time in creating the powerhouse of advertising that New York City is, creating the powerhouse of design and innovation that New York City is. You know, looking at Paul Rand's modern branding and simplicity and logic in his work, looking at Saul Bass's motion and emotion through his films and his logos, looking at Herb's typography and expressive visual telling, looking at Bernac's humanizing advertising and creativity and wit. All of these different aspects created the perfect storm for the New York style, the New York and modern America design and advertising look. So, thank you very much.